This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Artisanal Agency, the exclusive representative of the This Week in Tech podcast network. Reach Twit.tv's tech-savvy, affluent, highly engaged audience by booking your campaign now. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 562, Violent Agreement. Monday, October 7th, 2019. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob North. Thanks for joining us. Agencies take a beating from just about everyone. Employees are disgruntled, clients are distrustful, and consumers think ad people are all liars. So are they being treated unfairly, or is it all just a matter of karma for bad behavior? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, how iOS 13 is killing location marketing, fixing the struggle over retail personalization, the great chumbox consolidation, plus this week's fair, fail, foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the Chief Strategy Officer at marketing agency Roxa, Mr. Ian Baer. Ian, welcome back.
Thanks so much. Go Yankees.
Go Yankees. Now next, he's the author of the new book, Think, Do, Say. He's also the CEO of Toronto-based agency Church and State. Mr. Ron Tite is here. Hi, Ron.
Hello, Bob. Go Jays, but just next year. We're gonna go.
Wishful thinking is always a good thing. And finally, we have the digital marketing partner at growth consultancy Profit, who also has a new podcast coming out this month called Rising, about the careers of up-and-coming leaders in marketing, media, and innovation. Say hello to Mr. Mat Zucker. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Bob. Excited to be back. Go, Mr. Robot.
Now you're talking my speed. Sports ball is not my best thing. Well, let's jump right into the topics. First up, we've all heard the tropes. Agencies are sweatshops. Agencies are ageist. Agencies are sexist. Agencies are thieves and liars. The list goes on and on. But the magazine The Drum, offered a counter opinion this week, defending the industry. Matt, obviously, generalizations are never true. Blanket statements aren't the be-all, end-all in cases like this. But have we really been all that unfair in calling out bad behavior by agencies? What's your opinion on this?
Right. Well, I was in agencies for 23 years and helped run two as a creative leader, so it's kind of close to home. I think agencies are getting an unfair shake. I mean, consultants might get paid more, but no one grows up wanting to be a consultant, and a lot of us grew up wanting to work in advertising and be like David Ogilvy. So I guess I would talk about the misdirect in two ways. There's creative bad behavior, and there's deceptive marketing. So first, agencies are going through a really healthy and necessary transition of leadership, I would say. I mean, remember, it used to be a very conservative business climate, right? So ad agencies were this bastion of free thinking, rebellion, and creativity run by a bunch of like bright, bad boy white guys, right? Who honestly probably weren't very nice and kind of in love with their own press and genius. The bad behavior, though, was interlinked with creativity, and we worshipped it. But the thing is, now that disruption and innovation is respected everywhere, right? Everyone can wear jeans to a meeting. Creative has to grow up. It has to be clever and drive business. But the rebellious ass-jackery and coddling is unacceptable. And a lot of bad headlines are coming from that wake-up call. I think it's just an adjustment for the industry to be more collaborative, more diverse, creative, and more professional. Maybe even nicer. I mean, can you imagine? Frankly, I like seeing some of the arrogant jerks get knocked down a peg or two. I'm surprised it took so long.
Now, something you said there, you made the analogy that once upon a time in the far-off distant past, it was a whole bunch of really type A, very egotistical people in control of the business. Are you talking about like the 60s, the classic Mad Men era? Or are you talking something a little bit closer to home, like the 80s, 90s? I mean, because it's been a long time that this has been going on, hasn't it? I mean, this evolution from that scenario that you described to the point it is today?
Oh, this is right up until the recent past. This is right when I was getting into advertising, and Kirschenbaum and Bond, was the great fun shop on the street. I don't think it's an old ancient history. I think it's very, very recent history.
Ron,
Yeah, I mean, I if I can pop in there.
Yeah, I was going to go to you next anyway.
I have a similar background. Right? I was the creative director as well, and I hope I wasn't one of those people. But certainly at a time, I agree with Matt in one way that this behavior surrounding creativity was rewarded, and we used to joke that the best part of a client's day was coming to the agency because there were no rules, and that got them the best work. And I think that all started to change, when we started to have some financial troubles in the first dot-com bust, and then again in '08. And once the cost consultants came in and everyone started nickeling and diming and everything. My issue, though, my biggest issue is that all the fingers are being pointed at agencies. And Arthur Sadoun, who's the CEO of Publicis, said a line that I think has not been said enough, which is, I keep hearing about the agency of the future. I never hear about the client of the future. This is an ecosystem, and clients and agencies did that dance together, and the roles they played with one another created the ecosystem that generated great work in the modern advertising era. And everyone's pointing the finger at the agencies. That's my bias. I own one. But nobody is pointing the finger at clients and saying, what are you doing to really evolve as an industry?
Well, don't you think that the clients aren't fingers being pointed at the clients as much as agencies by consumers? I mean, consumers have a distrust of marketing in general. They're not singling out agencies for their ire. They're singling out everybody in marketing as being responsible for the bad behavior. So is this an issue that's broader than agencies and something that needs to be addressed at a macro level across them? It sounds like what you're saying is yes, it does.
I was at a conference for influencer marketing fraud just 3 weeks ago, and I think that was the consensus that it's everyone's challenge is how do you handle the bad behavior in influencer marketing. It wasn't just the agencies or the platforms or the influencers themselves. It was just a kind of a lack of a new structure and new standards.
Yeah, and Ron, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say I wouldn't listen to the average consumer when it comes to this because, I don't think the average consumer really has any idea what an agency does or what that environment is like. I mean, the older ones would think of Bewitched. I think I'm going to be 50. And the younger ones probably think of like Melrose Place or something, or I don't know. But they just think that clients make commercials. They don't know the background of what an agency does and all that agencies did, earlier in the life cycle of advertising.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that the impression of agencies by the average consumer is heavily covered by their experience with Mad Men. I mean, if you've watched Mad Men, that's probably your only understanding of advertising, and you think that's probably what it's like in there. So if that's the case, we're seriously effed. There's no getting back from culture. Ian, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I mean, the article argues that no agency people go to work with the express desire to lie and cheat consumers. But isn't the industry still complicit in its rationalization of troubling tactics or known problems or things like that? I mean, can we defend advertising carte blanche because some people go to work not thinking evil thoughts?
Well, look, as members of the advertising community, and I often describe myself as an agency lifer. I mean, other than cooking, which I don't think I would be able to do professionally, this is the only thing I know how to do, and I've been doing it since I was 20 years old. That was a really long time ago. I started
not that long ago. You're not that old.
53, my man. So when I started, it was like the sunsetting of the Mad Men era. It was the late 80s. The bad behavior was winding down, or at least it was morphing into a different kind of bad behavior. But what's happening now, it's not just the advertising industry, right? There's stuff going on, especially throughout media and entertainment, but also throughout corporate America. People are waking up. This is a good thing. Workplaces are becoming more diverse, they're becoming more tolerant, and that changes the expectation. It's not just about political correctness, it is about decency. You spoke earlier and said, wouldn't it help to just be nice? I'm proud to work for a place where we put a huge priority on treating people decently. And I think that's what it's about more than it is any one industry or any one type of actor within a certain space. It's not just about creative people or, strategists with giant egos, present company excluded. And it's really about bringing business value and treating people with empathy and humanity. It's also about transparency in business practices. I think if the ad industry has come under fire, other than the Me Too stuff, for anything in the last 5 to 10 years, it's been lack of transparency. So I think it's been a giant wake-up call. I think some players have fallen by the wayside as a result. I do not at all think that's a bad thing.
I would argue that even the Me Too movement is because of a lack of transparency. I mean, just not that willingness to transparently look at yourself and say that you have problems within the corporate structure of your organization and that you're doing things wrong. I mean, I think that's definitely part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly an inclusion problem, if nothing else. It all comes back to inclusion.
Something that's occurring to me as this conversation's evolved, because the problem really is about marketing as a whole. And I'm wondering, Matt, how much of this is just a matter of Google and Facebook taking so much heat for their bad advertising tactics, and especially Facebook with the Russian hacking scandal and all that other stuff that they were complicit and involved with. I mean, are we getting a halo effect that's going to be really tough to dismantle just because we're in advertising?
I mean, maybe. I mean, there was always deceptive advertising, but it was very, very fringe. Like, it was never mainstream that we all knew of. But more recently, stuff is much more in the news and headlines and more visible. And, there's all those stats for people that don't trust brands. Well, the stats are just as high for brands that don't trust the platforms on which they market. So I think it is real. I don't think it's just a couple headlines, but people are doing stuff about it. People are putting things in place. People are watching the kickbacks in media. And like I mentioned, influencer marketing is getting cleaned up now, just like social was, 5 or 6 years ago. So it's a very positive transition that's happening, and the headlines help. I mean, when agencies put spotlight on clients for bad BD behaviors, right, bad RFP behaviors, it really does help everyone. So it's it's not a bad thing.
Well, the spotlight and the headlines help from a B2B standpoint. They help between that. It's kind of solve that relationship problem between the clients and the agencies and ad tech and the management consultancies and everybody else involved. But what about consumers? I mean, I can't imagine consumers are glued to the headlines about whether or not some RFP is being unfair to the agency community.
I don't think they care.
Right. So how do we improve our opinion? How do we improve our stature and our PR value among consumers, short of just not doing the bad things that we keep getting caught doing?
Do we have
I think
to?
a lot of it is about treating them with respect. I'm sorry.
Everybody spoke at once. Let's go with Ian first.
I was just going to say, I think what it comes down to there is really about treating consumers with respect and putting value on them, not just in terms of the transactional behavior they can afford a business, but valuing their loyalty and their time and treating them like people. And I think when marketing as a practice makes that the rule rather than the exception, and it's happening, and some brands are really leading the way very powerfully, then perceptions will shift because we're actually going to treat people decently, and we've been doing it.
And Ron, you had a thought?
Yeah, I think it goes all the way up to the shareholder. I mean, if you look at the way it trickles down, so shareholders are looking for, at least in global publicly traded organizations, they're looking for quarterly numbers. They want fast returns. And so that trickles down to somebody else, to the C-suite, and then down to directors and brand managers and everybody else. And everyone is just chasing numbers. And so, and those numbers get morphed into like vanity numbers and vanity metrics. And I think there are people, I don't know, my bias is being as a former executive creative director, the creative people have been notorious to come in and go, that's not going to work. Like, this is ridiculous. But I think other folks within the chain kind of going, look, it's going to give us the metrics that we need. It's not going to get our client fired. They're going to get promoted and everything else, even though the actual effect on the business is ridiculous. It doesn't do anything. And so that has moved, that reliance on these vanity metrics has moved a lot of power into the media agencies. And if you look at how the growth of media agencies and the margins that media agencies have, even though nobody's paying 15 points on a media plan anymore. So the percentage of media buying has gone drastically down, yet somehow the margins have gone up. And that's because of trading desks and everything else, programmatic.
And that's what Michael Farmer's book, Madison Avenue Manslaughter, that's at the center of his argument, that unbundling of media from the agency world has, made a cash cow at the expense of the rest of the organization.
Yeah, because the unethical behaviors that we talk about, through my entire career as a creative guy, did I ever feel like I was being briefed on something unethical, or where I wrote something unethical, or where I created a campaign where I kind of thought, you know what, we're totally pulling the wool over consumers' eyes here. And so when you look at all the behavior and talking about the mistrust that consumers have, I don't think it's with messaging. I think it's with placement, and I think it's with performance and the kind of ads kind of following people around the internet because of retargeting, and that's all media placement. I wish they were here to defend themselves, but they're not.
Yeah, we don't have a media person on tonight. So, okay, cat's out of the bag. We're just going to go after media people. Hey, Matt, one last question. I mean, doesn't the fact that ad tech and the management consultancies pay better for the same work force us to consider that agency model is fundamentally broken when we're not compensating our people, or not compensating the best people as much as they deserve, and it's forcing them to consider other career opportunities and other career trajectories. And when you know what happens when you don't have the best people choosing your profession, it eventually rots from the inside. So is that a problem?
I don't think so, because you can still make a lot of money in advertising, and
yeah, I mean, that's like, nobody's begging
people,
nobody's begging the poorhouse in advertising right now, but it is getting kind of tight. And if you do make the money, you're working all the time.
Well, I think consultancies and agencies are becoming more and more similar. I think the brain drain is going to the client side, or to the startups. I mean, that's where we see people going. Fewer people are going into marketing, whether it's going into a consultancy or going into an agency, and more people want to go, do product. They want to do the product itself, which now people can do more easily than ever. So I don't think it's the competition between them more than it's a competition with the product.
Well, I want to move on and talk next about how iOS is surprisingly affecting location marketers. It's not a good story, but we're going to get to it in just a minute. But first, I got to talk about our sponsor for this evening. Look, attention, all brands, big and small, as well as media buyers out there. After we trashed you, we're really bringing you in for the love now. If you're looking to connect with a technology-minded audience, our sponsor, Artisanal Agency, is the exclusive representative for Twit.tv, one of the most prestigious tech podcasting networks out there. And they are looking to help you to reach their extremely lucrative audience. Now, as any longtime fan of the BeanCast will tell you, it was Twit.tv and their flagship show, This Week in Tech. Those are the shows that inspired me more than any other podcast when I was just getting started. And I've been a loyal listener of their shows for over a decade now. I mean, they're always entertaining, always informative, a variety of awesome programming. I mean, shows that I listen to all the time, like Mac Break Weekly and iOS Today, as well as other shows that are just phenomenal in terms of their quality and in terms of the information. Security Now, Windows Weekly, and of course, This Week in Tech, the granddaddy of them all. That's just one of the best tech podcasts out there. And when you look at their numbers, it's jaw-dropping when you consider them. I mean, from a download standpoint, 50 million downloads a year. 70% of that audience directly work in tech. So you're getting exactly to the people who make decisions in technology. And 82% of them say that they have bought a product directly as a result of a twit.tv ad recommendation. And let's dwell on that last point just for a minute, shall we? Because they are offering an actual live read recommendation here. So not everyone can advertise on twit.tv. What the process is artisanal agency, they'll carefully vet each sponsor so that they're tech journalists, and we're talking about real journalists here. We're not talking about just some marketing guy who's out there trying to do a podcast like me. We're talking about tech journalists who are hosting these programs, and they are offering your brand a wholehearted recommendation because of this vetting. And also because of the vetting, you can relax knowing there won't be any brand safety issues because everybody's vetted it, so you're not running aside something that's going to be embarrassing for you. Whether you're coming with a completely baked campaign or need everything from graphics to ad copy help, Artisanal Agency offers a hands-on approach. They ensure your campaigns run seamlessly. They handle the onboarding of hosts. They handle the delivering of creative assets. They'll even monitor ad reads. Reach out today and start your campaign on the twit.tv network. Visit artisanalagency.com. That's artisanalagency.com to find out more. Or email hello@artisanalagency.com. That's hello@artisanalagency.com. Start your next podcast ad campaign with a show from Twit, and we thank them very much for their support of the BeanCast. Well, one of the coolest new features in the latest read of iOS is its protection of our privacy. I love these little notifications that come up that tell me that somebody's been accessing my GPS or this app's been accessing some servers in the background. But all of those dialogues are also causing headaches for location marketers, as every beacon that tries to track users in store is now being thwarted by the new transparency of the user being given the power to grant or deny permission. My question, Ron, is this really a bad thing? I mean, it's just like they're talking about it like being the end of the world for location marketers, but transparency is a good thing, I thought.
It is a very good thing. No, this is incredible. Of course it is. It's amazing. I mean, I think Apple's being really smart here. One, they haven't been caught up as much of the security debate and crisis around this as much as Google and Facebook and even Amazon has. So I think it's a very great strategic move for Apple to make and to start to own that conversation. I think if you're a location marketer, I think you need to do what other tactical marketers do, and that is become a marketer. And I find that once we start to access tactics like this, I think it's just it's an excuse, or it's a workaround for a crappy product, not a crappy product, a product that hasn't done enough to pull people in, and that. Most of the tactics I see location marketers talk about, whether it's beacons in stores or some sort of gated network around a retail operation, is really about how can we ping somebody when they're close. In other words, we haven't interrupted them enough, and how can we, when they're close to shelf, how can we then interrupt them yet again? And you know what? It's kind of like when content marketers started, and content marketers said, this is amazing. You can create content and it's all organic. And that lasted for about 6 months. And then, hey, guess what? Everything becomes an ad now, and everything had to be amplified. And at the end of the day, what is going to win, regardless of the time? Great products for great people with a messaging that is compelling and interesting enough for people to want to seek it, not that they have to seek it. So
And not everyone will turn it off, right? Like, wouldn't it be great if you got people who really, really want it on, high engagement, really high response? I mean, I now live in farm country, so I'm going to leave my location on because it helps me. If there's a sudden lightning storm, or I don't know, a cow crossing. So I don't know if I want Best Buy to know my location since I'm not sure the connection to me. But I can see giving it to a food brand or my car brand or someone else. It could be really useful, and I'd want to target people that want me.
Yeah, there's also the fact that from reason consumers don't want you connecting with them is because of the interruptions that Ron talked about right from the beginning. I mean, if it's just about interruption and it's not about providing some legitimate service to the consumer in that store experience, it's just more noise. And I love the idea of having a vetted permission-based audience, because it doesn't matter that I'm pinging every person coming through the store if most of them don't want to be pinged and they don't want to be part of this conversation. So what good is it doing me reaching out to them? That's like the email marketer who hits everybody, spams everybody instead of the verified list of users that want to see the email. It's just, it's trolling, but it's not really effective overall. Ian, what decisions does this force location marketers to make? I mean, how is this going to make location marketing better, in your opinion?
Well, I agree with the sentiment that everyone has expressed so far. This is a good thing. And what it means for marketers is the Bill and Ted rule applies. Be excellent. Be excellent to your customers. If I can bring it to the simplest analogy that everyone certainly experiences is on a regular basis, maybe I do less now that I'm a keto dieter, but, you don't have any problem with the pizza delivery guy whose background you don't know and may very well be sketchy, knowing exactly where you live, having your phone number, and what you get out of that is your pizza shows up on time with exactly the toppings you wanted on it. When you give somebody the thing that they want or value, then they're okay and they're going to give you that permission when they understand that they're going to get something in return that's going to make their life better in that moment or in the long run. I think what it cuts off at the knees as Apple, and Apple will only be, they're a leader, but this is the trend that everyone's going to have to follow. As you start having to market to people on a personal level without necessarily exploiting their personal data, it raises the stakes for everybody to give people things that they really want and need and cherish. And if what you're going to do is use access to my private data and location in order to bombard me with things I don't want or hijack me, then you lose, and you got to go back and, again, be excellent.
One of the things,
you know what, Ian, I love that metaphor. Sorry, Bob, I can pop in.
No,
I love the
it.
metaphor of the pizza delivery guy, because I think the second half of that equation is, why do we do that? Like, why are we comfortable giving the pizza guy our name and our number and our toppings and everything else? And I think it's part of the reason is because the pizza guy doesn't call us at 4:00 on a Tuesday randomly and say, "Hey, we're wondering if you want a calzone tonight." It's just like, it just doesn't come from out of nowhere. You trust them because they don't abuse the trust, that they use it for what is intended for that specific order delivered on that specific night. And they don't use that information against you to try and upsell you and cross-sell you and contact you when you have no desire to talk to them,
or
because it's
give your number
meatless
to some other
Mondays.
pizza guy.
What about the fact?
Yes.
What about the fact that most of the promise from location marketing, Matt, has been centered around the tracking of consumers and not necessarily the outreach? Just knowing what store traffic patterns are, being able to merchandise to those patterns, the learning that goes on. I mean, all this was happening in the background, and now suddenly it's being brought to the forefront. Is there any way to solve that problem? Because it's just like, I just imagine consumers getting really paranoid as all these alerts come on that this beacon wants to connect to them, and they're just like, why?
Well, I mean, so the transformation of using of the tracking for operation purposes and inventory and stuff, that's different from actually reaching out to people and telling them something about where they are. I mean, I think all the awards have been won for weather near you, right? So I think it's just limited, in what you should need to do with that data to reach out to somebody, and you be selective, and it's being relevant and being contextual and not wasting it, because if you could really ruin your database, you could really have more people opt out than you even intended. So I think this will just self-correct, and you'll get a lot of people opting in. That'll be the new wave, that'll be the new fun, rather than worrying about people opting out or being defaulted out.
Ian, do you agree with that sentiment? Do you think that that it's just going to be natural selection here when it comes to the people who are using it for data only and trying to get tracking information about customer patterns within the store or what customer preferences are?
On this point, we are in violent agreement. We spoke earlier about marketers potentially being seen as bad guys, right? I can tell you that nothing gives us a more interesting challenge right now, and more encouraging challenge, than when one of our clients makes the decision to shift from opt out to opt in. And it's happening. And some of the brands my agency represents. And I'm telling you right now, there are a lot of meetings about, hey, as we shift to the opt in model, what value can we start bringing our customers so that they really understand we're doing this to make their experience with the brand better, not just to take advantage of them. And as more brands embrace that mantle, look, we're marketing people, we're also consumers. And we recognize it's going to be just a better world and a better situation for everyone, at least, in our little part of the universe.
And that's the $36,000 question, though, when it comes down to how we're going to convince consumers that this is a positive thing for them. Is it about messaging, or is it just about proving to them? And have we already squandered a chance to prove it to them because we've done so many nasty things with their data over the time that we've had it?
The word I bring up more than any other in those conversations is evidence. What evidence can we give a consumer that we actually have their best interests at heart? We live in a fairly troubling time when it comes to things like facts and truth. And I do think it's incumbent on brands to show evidence that this really is a two-way street and that it is a give to get. It's not just a get for the brands. And brands can't behave the way they did 10 or 20 years ago. That's a good thing.
Now, Ron, any last words on this? Any last pieces of advice you could give to location marketers out there who are struggling with this? I mean, what would you say the one piece of advice would be?
Well, to build on Ian's point there, I think I like the notion of showing the evidence that we do have their best interest at heart. I also think a massive shift in tone has to take place. When you look at the real disruptors in a lot of categories, and we'll say that the real disruptors are solving the problems the establishment can't or won't. And some of those problems are simply a matter of tone. That if it's too scripted and too polished, then the consumer doesn't trust you, because if you're hiding, your true authenticity, then what else are you hiding? And, we've seen in a lot of categories, brands coming in and taking out the establishment by simply talking in a really honest tone and talking in a really transparent way. So I don't think, I agree that action is the primary piece that is going to motivate people to opt in. But I think secondarily is messaging.
Well, it's definitely something that we're going to keep an eye on, because this was surprising when I saw this article, the fact that iOS is kind of breaking this very tried and true system. It was bound to happen, I guess. Well, moving on, yet more studies that show users appreciate personalization in their marketing more and more, while at the same time they are growing less and less willing to share personal information. Ian, why is it that the industry can't crack this nut? Why can't we figure this one out? I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've covered this story on the show.
Well, I think a lot of it, personalization is a word that has been severely overused and stretched beyond its limitations. It's sort of the same trap that people fell into for a while with a word like integration. Um, so many times personalization is still taken to mean, well, if I slap your name on something, or if I get your address right, it's personalized. Or if I know the thing you ordered last time, oh, that's personalized. No, personalized, take it down to its base, means treating me like a person, treating me the way you would somebody you actually knew something about. Marketing is just a proxy for one-to-one selling. And in the old days, when you had a relationship with somebody who was selling you your, stuff from the butcher shop, or your milk route, or whatever it might be, they knew you. They knew who you were. They knew who lived in your home. They paid attention to those things. And what happened as a result of that was emotional connection. And the brands that get it right when it comes to personalization, where people aren't going to be freaked out and feel like you're creeping on them, is when that data is used in ways that build emotional bonds with the brand. It was a great study that Harvard Business Review published a few years ago that I go back to all the time, which showed that even among customers with top box satisfaction, if they're highly satisfied but don't feel fully connected to the brand, they don't spend more than the average customer. In fact, sometimes they spend less, because just bombarding them with things you know about them, but not extending it to the point where it adds some level of richness or trust or authenticity to my relationship with that brand, it doesn't get you anywhere. People who feel emotionally connected to a brand spend 52% more. And now the onus shifts to marketers to make better and more responsible and more customer-centric use of that data, and not just use it to further their own agendas and figure out the next thing to sell you.
Bob, what I've seen as a barrier to this hasn't been, for years we've been trying to do it in our outbound marketing and our emails and our advertising, which I'm not even sure people really care about that much. But the barrier has been a lot of brands cannot do that single view of the customer. They've got the data all over the place in different places, and they can't put it together, so they can't do personalization. So I think the reason we still have this conversation and you're still covering it is just because of an ability to really pull it off closer to the experience when people call in versus email in versus chat in. It's on the back end that the clients can't yet pull it off, but they're hopefully getting there.
Yeah, that's a really insightful comment there, Matt. As was what you said, Ian, about personalization being a personal experience, and yeah, this ongoing issue of not being able to actually deliver on the personalization and being able to only get as far as bucketing groups. Bucketing groups is not the same thing as personalization, Ron. Right? I mean, it's just like when you put a whole bunch of people who are 35 and have BMWs in one group, that's not personalizing them. That's kind of just marketing to a certain group with a little bit more targeting, right?
Her name is Nancy. She's 42 and a half. She drives a minivan. She's our shopper persona. That's what it typically is, right? That's the customization we typically get.
I've heard that.
And we know that at the heart of personalization, you're right in that there is this contradiction, because on one hand, we're all snowflakes. We all think we're unique. And, I think there's great insight around the Coke. Who would you share a Coke with? What did people do? They didn't look for people's names that they could share Cokes with. They looked for their own name. They looked through the fridge for the Coke with their own name on it. We all want stuff tailored to us. And on the other hand, we're really hesitant to give up information, because I think even just outside of everything advertising has done, these macro cultural forces of people screaming, the Russians stole the election and Cambridge Analytica stole our data, and Lance Armstrong lied to our faces 10 years ago, and they're still not over that. So there is that really difficult thing to do. What was the line? I violently agree with Ian's characterization of personalization. That I think where it starts with frontline employees who aren't holding a device, who aren't close to a terminal, who actually are trained and empowered to genuinely want to connect with another human being. My wife bought a piece of art from a place in a city far away and we didn't know this outlet. It was a retailer. We didn't know them or anything. Now, my wife's name is Christy Pickles. It's a great handle. And this piece of art came, and along with the piece of art was a card, and like a Hallmark card, but it was a Hallmark card with a jar of pickles on it, and it said, "You mean a great dill to me." And inside the line was, "Here's your order. Is your last name really Pickles? I love it. That's amazing." So that is like one person, spending 5 extra minutes to gather something, to write a customized note. And that is a genuine desire to connect with a human being. When we can do that, and we can stop being the robots that we've been told that we're supposed to be, then maybe consumers will realize that we actually have their best interests at heart.
But don't we need to be robots in order to scale this? I mean, don't we need robots and AI, especially for big brands, to give that level of personalization? Because it's just like if you're a brand that's trading in specialty merchandise like what you're talking about, it's not easy, but it's possible that every operator can be empowered to do something special like that. Like Zappos was really good at doing that in the early days. But
there's a great example here. Best Buy, and I believe the program is coming to the U.S. Best Buy in Canada, Cami Scarlett, who's the Chief Human Resources Officer of Best Buy and the President of U.S. Retail. She was CHRO in Canada. And what she found in analyzing the behaviors of frontline employees was that they wanted to deliver great service, but that there were so many policies and procedures and, is this a 2-weeker? Is this a 3-week? Can I get it? And they wanted to do it, but there were so many rules to memorize. And she understood that you can't scale great service when you're throwing all that at them. The program changed, and this was the only direction she gave to her frontline staff: be awesome. That was it. We hire you based on your values. We train you based on the organization and the products. At some point, we have to trust you to do the right thing. And so just whatever you feel you need to do to be awesome, go ahead and do that. And I would argue that is way easier to scale than putting in scripted dialogue with saying, we have to say that, is there anything I found you today? Or sorry, is there anything I can help you find today? Delivered in that robotic retail voice. And when we say that, the consumer, they know that script, and they know that they have a role in that script, and they respond by saying, "No, thanks, I'm just looking."
Now, we talk a lot about, this issue as being a matter of we're doing bad things with the outreach in terms of that's what's driving consumers away. But Matt, it comes up again, this Facebook Google question. Is there a halo? Is there a halo over the entire industry because of the fact that the big data titans like Amazon, Google, Facebook are doing so much with our data, and we're getting kind of distrustful of it? So, is the consumer ever going to be rational about this issue in that kind of environment?
I feel like, they'll be the villain of the week, and then you'll move on to a new villain. So right now it's them. But right now, Apple's, trusted, right? Because they do all these great things, but now they've got the credit card, and I'm going to trust them with my financial stuff because it's Apple. But, one mess up, and I'm going to move on and not like them and start to like Microsoft or something. So I think the villains will move around. I don't think it's going to be mistrust of data. I think it's going to be the who and the use case. There's plenty of use cases where you're going to trust people with the data because they're going to create value, and there's going to be a lot of trust cases where you're going to get burned, and then there'll be a lot of people that burn you. But I don't think the problem will be a generic privacy trust issue. I think it's too nuanced for that.
Well, moving on to our final topic of the night, let's talk about the Taboola and Outbrain merger. Is this a good thing, or is this troubling to you guys? I'm going to throw this out. Anybody want to tackle this one first? Because this is a massive story, and I have no idea where to even begin with this. Ian, you want to go?
Yeah, sure, I'll start. Look, troubling, I'm going to save a term like troubling for a lot of other things. I'm not going to lose sleep over whether that industry over consolidates or whether we run out of, uh, more options for largely irrelevant link baiting sort of content to pull people into. Now, I'm not saying there aren't cases in which, if the target's really broad, that stuff can be effective, but it's sure not at the top of the list of where we're recommending to Fortune 100, Fortune 500 brands. I do think, it's definitely a place to get cheap eyeballs and cheap clicks, but I don't think whether there's one, two, three, or five players will affect it all that much because it's still cheap clicks.
Early on in the development of this industry, I was hearing some of the blue chip clients out there talking about Outbrain in particular as being essential for the content marketing strategy that a lot of these big brands were doing. Where did things go wrong, Ron? Or, I mean, why is this like this today?
I think because the examples were the content examples were few and far between, and it got wrapped up with the ridiculous oh my God, when this hamster saw this mouse, you won't believe what happened next. And
by the way, kudos to the New York Times for this article. It's just like that we were referencing for this story. One of the articles we referenced where it's just like this what was the headline? Something about this article will make you go crazy or something.
Yeah, exactly. Headline. Yeah, great headline. And I mean, I could just call this kind of clickbait convergence. And who I'm surprised is actually in the publisher space. I can appreciate a brand wanting clicks and million or quarterly numbers, but if I'm a respected journalism-backed news organization, I can't believe that they would just let their brand get watered down by being associated with stuff like this, even though they've got all the warnings in there that it's paid content and everything else. It is a brand extension into the place. And I think the publishers have needed this as they figured out their new business model in this new era. And I can only hope that this isn't a part of it moving forward. And that once they're not reliant on that revenue anymore and they've figured out a more robust business model moving forward, I don't know that there's a huge future for this industry.
I mean, the good news is they needed an alternative, so 2 billion people is a lot of people. So this is an alternative to Facebook and Google. And if you're a content marketer, you need to syndicate, right? You need the reach. So this is, I mean, hopefully they can do a classier version. The downside is by having fewer players in the space, there might be less innovation and less people trying to innovate and doing interesting or classier moves, for big brands. But they do need content syndication. Content marketing is not going to go away.
It's interesting to me that in this industry, there are basically two players. I mean, there's Taboola and then there's Outbrain, and now there's suddenly one. It's going to be Taboola. It looks like it's going to be on top. Outbrain name is going away. They're being absorbed into the Taboola brand. So, Ian, is that a good thing? Were they the better player, or are they just the bigger player?
Yeah, that, to me, bigger, not necessarily better, but I do think I like a lot of what's coming out of this dialogue right now because it does shine a little bit of a light and say, there's an opportunity to go to all the things that really work about content syndication, which is a model that I've worked in since it first became an opportunity. I was fortunate enough to be part of starting up one of the first pure play branded content shops, and that's where we lived and breathed. Native is still a good opportunity for a lot of brands, and it gets very blurry between what the Outbrains and Taboolas of the world are doing and true opportunities to do native or sponsored content. I think when you're meeting people's needs, it still works. So hopefully if there's a consolidation among the clickbait, as I think it was Ron was saying, that's fine. Hopefully it opens up the opportunity, to Matt's point, for more quality alternatives.
Well, with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug. We're starting tonight with Ian Baer. You can find him at rauxa.com. That's RAUXA.com. Tell us what's going on in your world, Ian. What would you like to promote?
Well, I will always pass on my shameless plug to my clients. So stick with Verizon for the future of 5G. Go check out a new Audi Q3 at your local Audi dealer. Fly Alaska. Go customize a pair of Vans.
Are we talking about the driving vans, or are we talking about shoe vans?
No, the ones that go on your feet.
All right. I'll customize either. Next up, Ron Tite. You can find him at churchstate.co. Churchstate.co. Try that again. He's also at rontite.com. Tell us what's going on in your world, Ron. What would you like to promote?
Well, I got a big day tomorrow. Tomorrow is the official launch of my second book, Think, Do, Say. So that's available wherever you get your books, both online and off. And then there's a podcast that looks at disruption through the lens of a political coup d'etat called The Coup. But the only deal is if you listen to that, you cannot break away from this podcast to do so.
Okay, thank you for that. And also, just to reiterate the name of the book, because you broke up there, it's Think, Do, Say, and it comes out tomorrow. So check that out. Last but not least, Mat Zucker. You can find him at profit.com. That's profit is in the seer, not profit is in profitability, but I'm thinking that there is a double entendre there. So go ahead and tell us what's going on in your world.
Thanks. As you mentioned at the top of the show, I've got a new podcast coming out called Rising, which is all about folks in marketing, media, and innovation. And it's kind of the number twos. There's a lot of focus on the leaders in the industry and a lot of them practitioners. But what about the next generation of leaders? So it should be in the Apple Store, hopefully, in the next 5 to 10 days. It's already on Spotify, Radio Public, and Anchor, and I'm really excited about it. So please have a listen. There's this segment on it called Thank You Notes, where people give individual thank you notes to people that helped them in their career, and it's super charming.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm glad you're doing that. It's an important show. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to advertise on this program. We would love to have you on as a sponsor. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, this one really surprised me. The fair for this week is surprising because I used to view this as a niche thing. Fortune cookie marketing used to be a novelty, but as marketers log success after success with the tactic, Ron, this entire sector is exploding with wider distribution and increasing advertiser demand. What's going on with advertising in fortune cookies in Chinese restaurants around the country? This is amazing that it's working so well.
Well, I'm going to launch a sister agency that is exclusively a fortune cook creative agency now that I've seen this. Sure. Okay. I think it's the latest thing. I think, is there nothing holy? Can we not leave the fortune cookies out of this? I mean, go ahead. Put your brand on every inch of real estate everywhere, from gas pumps to urinals.
What a great idea, though, when you think about it, though. What a great idea. The restaurant doesn't have to pay for their cookies anymore. Instead, they get free cookies to distribute to people, and they can contain a marketing message which pays for it all. And I'm just like, this is brilliant. Everybody wins. Yeah. Everybody wins. There's no downside.
It's subsidized content in its purest form. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's one of those things like, hey, if it works and you get your numbers, then great. And I'm sure, people are getting the numbers that they want. And of course, we'll hit that inverted U when people will tire of seeing a credit card ad on the back of their lucky numbers, and they'll roll their eyes. But for now, if it makes you, gives you your numbers, then go for it.
Well, next up, we have our foul of the week. This week's foul is going to WeWork. WeWork has gone from IPO darling to now. This really surprised me, Ian. It wasn't just that it was bad that they had to pull back on their IPO. Now they're trying to avoid bankruptcy in under 3 weeks. How much malfeasance was going on at this company, allegedly?
It's remarkable. I mean, they will write books and make movies about this one. This might be the foul of the year, depending on how it all plays out and whether the company survives. We're certainly expecting, unfortunately, to see a ton of people lose their jobs. Look, there have been other business models in the past. I remember as a former Long Islander, there was a retail chain that was taking over the country based on Long Island called Steve & Barry's. I don't know if anyone remembers it. Mm-mm. And their entire model was based on taking over large-scale retail spaces from stores that had gone belly up, paying pennies on the dollar, exploiting every inch of that space. But when the lease was up, their business completely failed. The whole WeWork model, when you think about it, they didn't really own their real estate, right? So the whole model is predicated on somehow leasing parts of business of office space to people, and believing that the sum can possibly be greater than what you're paying out, but with all the common spaces in expensive retail markets. I just want to know, who were the analysts that looked at this over the last few years and said, this is a great business? I just can't believe everyone's surprised. This was never a business.
Yeah, I think some of it was that a lot of the truth of the operation was hidden, like the fact that the CEO was owner of a lot of these properties and renting it back and leasing it off to his own business, making a mint on real estate.
The malfeasance set aside from a fatally flawed business model.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know who this is great for, though? This is going to be wonderful news, because all the entrepreneurs who are now going to be out of office space are going to be going back to Starbucks in droves to work from tables ordering lattes until the end of the day.
It's going to be great news for Starbucks.
I'll tell you this, for anyone who might be a fan of the show Broad City, or even if you're not, find the episode from their last season about SheWork, where one of the two lead characters decides to open and lease out office space on a street corner using power from the street light. Pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, our foul of the week, the worst news here. This one it was not surprising, but it's just amazing how ugly it got so fast, Matt. The streaming wars just got uglier this week with all of Disney's many media properties, and Disney owns everything. They own so many networks. They're basically officially barring any ads from Netflix and Amazon Prime streaming, basically any of their competitors to Disney Plus. This is brutal. I expected it, but it's pretty brutal.
I mean, is it that ugly? I mean, isn't it just kind of common sense? I mean, I can advertise our new Rising podcast on your show because it's not a conflict. But say I created, a show with ripped from the headlines topics and 3 very attractive, well-spoken guests. You would say no, Matt, not today.
Well, if you paid me money, I would let you do it. I'm shameless when it comes to my advertising. I want to make sure that I get something that's useful for my audience, but I would take your money. Well,
I think this is just a natural evolution, because you know what's going to happen next, right? So this is going to go down, and then we're going to have 8 streaming networks. Each are going to be between, $4 and $9 a month. And then someone's going to come in and say, you can get all the streaming networks under one bundled package, and it's going to look exactly like what we used to pay for cable.
Right.
That's where this is going.
And the company will be started by Adam Newman, and we'll call it WeWatch.
Yeah. There you go. Trademark that. Get it right away. Get that URL. Well, anyway, have something to suggest for this list, or just want to discuss it? Comment online using the hashtag #FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. Well, that does it for this week's BeanCast. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
It's like, you know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.